Recording from the gold-plated porta-potty behind a barn venue that costs more than his pre-owned Pontiac Aztek with the GT trim, it's your host, Donovan. Welcome back to Deep Dives in the Shallow End, the podcast where we walk you down the aisle of late-stage capitalism and hope you didn't skip the prenup. I'm your not-so-expert host, Donovan, here to ask, what's more sacred, your love or the sucking chest wound that is your bank account? Today, we're unmasking the wedding industry, a festival of fiscal flagellation and forced fun, gift bag and garnished with the stale macaroons of middle-class misery. It's a multi-billion-dollar scam so insidious it makes Amway look like the Girl Scouts, except with fewer cookies and way more crying in bathroom stalls, which for me is already at a concerningly high level. I mean, why am I spending so much time in truck stop bathroom stalls? That's right. This episode, we're talking about the one party you're statistically most likely to regret, unless you count that time a homeless gentleman invited me to a party in the back of a pre-owned Pontiac Aztek with the GT trim. Party was a nice word for some aggressively heavy petting and huffing paint out of a paper bag, after which he pushed his finger onto my paint-stained mouth and in a drooling slur simply said, "Lipstick." We had a good laugh about that. I think it was a laugh. He may have been choking. Either way, we've kept in touch even after all these weeks, mostly by postcard. Romance isn't dead, people. It just smells like paint thinner. So, whether you're a hopeless romantic like me or just hopelessly in debt like me, let's take a deep dive into the overpriced horror known as the modern American wedding.
Plongez profond dans les petits bains. Plongez profond dans les petits bains.
Let's start with the basic math. In the U.S., the average wedding now clocks in around $30,000 to $35,000. That's right. You can either have a dream wedding or a Honda Civic with heated seats and enough trunk space for your suitcases for when this relationship inevitably crumbles. It's your call. Let's break that down for the kids at home and any listeners who are currently Googling, is annulment cheaper than divorce? First, the venue. We're talking over $12,000 on average, which gets you the privilege of standing in a barn that's seen more influencer photo shoots than livestock. You're paying extra for the chance to get married in a building with working plumbing and rustic charm. Few things scream class like the authentic scent of rodentia scat under the soft lights of a Pottery Barn chandelier. And oh, if those walls could talk, they'd probably tell tale of the choir of equine screams from the old gelding stall, which is coincidentally another name for marriage. Let's talk catering. $6,000 so you can feed your guests an industrially flash-frozen mac and cheese bar meticulously reconstituted over sterno cans alongside a steak that has the mouthfeel of my grandfather's leather Endicott Johnsons that he lifted from a man sleeping on a bench during the Great Depression. Photography. $4,000 because if you don't have 700 high-res photos of your drunk Uncle Russell dancing a bit too close to the teens who are just trying to sneak the abandoned half-drunk glasses of champagne, then that's not a wedding worth having. That said, if you haven't seen Russ effortlessly and seamlessly transition from the worm to a perfect Cabbage Patch, you're truly missing out. Then there's the, quote, entertainment. $3 large to ensure that the medical transcriptionist come DJ ignores your no YMCA request, and the band forgets your first dance song, but still somehow nails the cha-cha slide. Flowers are going to run you about $2,500. Apparently, the peonies have discovered their self-worth and are now priced accordingly. Thousands of dollars for blooms that will live for one day, just like the hope in your eyes. Let's move on to attire. $2,000-ish for a dress, assuming you're a cheap bastard, that she'll wear once and the finest rented tux that's seen more body fluids than a Greyhound bus seat and smells only marginally better. Rings. This price varies wildly, but it's the only time you'll buy something so tiny for so much money and spend the next 20 years pretending it was a good investment other than perhaps your Beanie Babies. Let's just hope the stone wasn't pried from between the toes of a Motswana kid who risked his leg for your symbol of eternal love. Because nothing says forever like a stone more likely to fund a coup than a honeymoon. De Beer's real slogan should be, "A diamond is forever," just like the phantom limb pain of every African miner who couldn't run fast enough. If you want to hire a planner to coordinate your nervous breakdown, you can expect to pay around $2,000 for some influencer whose taste reads more as Liberace meets Elvis in the Palace of Versailles. Then there's the miscellany. The extras. You got your cake, invitations, favors, and then surprise costs, the financial equivalent of wedding diarrhea. It's all fun and games until you're paying $1,500 for a cake that tastes like chocolate cornmeal wrapped in fondant. And remember, in places like New York or the Bay Area, just existing within a 3-mile radius of a vineyard can double those numbers. Apparently, love costs extra if there's a view of a grapevine and more mosquitoes than the Mekong Delta. So, to recap, the modern wedding is the only event where tradition requires you to hemorrhage cash with a smile and thank everyone for the privilege. But that monogrammed napkin as a keepsake will be perfect for sopping up the blood spurting from your nose from the credit card bill-induced rage stroke next month. And how do vendors get away with this usurious racket? Here's the magic trick. In the wedding industry, simply uttering the word wedding is like waving a wad of cash over a bonfire and calling it a sacred ritual. Tell any vendor your event is a wedding, and you'll see prices leap like your heart rate after 3 key bumps at the bachelorette party. It's called the wedding markup. A 2016 Consumer Reports investigation found that 28% of vendors admitted to quoting higher prices for a wedding than for an identical event labeled an anniversary party. In Australia, half of venues jacked up rates just because they heard the word wedding. You want a cake? Tell a bakery it's for a family reunion and it's $100. Accidentally mutter the word wedding and suddenly the same cake has an exponential price increase, but now does include the bonus edible gold leaf and subtle aftertaste of Nuani's fingers. Oh, who is Nuani, you ask? That's just the name of the Congolese child who mined it. It's so romantic. Florists, bakeries, DJs, photographers, they all have wedding packages. That is code for the same service, but now with a congratulations sucker surcharge. One economist tells the story of a caterer who quoted $60 per person for a banquet until he found out it was for a wedding, and abracadabra, it was $90 per head. No extra ingredients, just extra fees for the privilege of wowing people who will have infected Spanx lines once they get home. And why do they get away with this? Because weddings are emotional blackmail with heavily scrutinized appetizers. You can't not have flowers, a photographer, or a whimsical aesthetic inspired by Friedensreich Hundertwasser. I mean, who wants to be judged by the Budweiser swilling trash you call friends and families for having canapes that they describe on this one day as humiliatingly facile and jejune? I mean, you go to a wedding and suddenly everyone turns into Axel Vervoet with the working vocabulary of Jacques Lacan. Tomorrow, however, they will be ordering the never-ending pasta bowl at Olive Garden, which, to their credit, will probably be of better quality than what was served at the wedding. And there's no such thing as just enough. There's only not enough for Instagram, for which you need those aforementioned extras. If you want your wedding to stand out, just add a few personal touches, custom cocktail napkins, a live painter, a dove release, or a disturbingly detailed and presumably accurate ice sculpture of the groom and the buff. At least it distracts from the groomsman's sleeve tattoo reading WWG1WGA. And if you know, you know, and if you don't, good for you. But it's not just America. Around the world, the wedding scam can get even weirder. In India, families can spend several years' worth of salary on a wedding, sometimes bankrupting themselves for the sake of a week-long festival. In South Korea, it's not uncommon to drop $100,000 or more on a wedding, complete with a rented fleet of Lamborghinis for the bridal party and a drone light show that would put Elon Musk's wet dreams to shame. But let's peel back that fondant and get to the raw, mealy cake of it all. Why do otherwise sensible people fall for the wedding scam? Is it love? Is it tradition? Or is it just a perverse joke with passable hors d'oeuvres? First, the pressure is everywhere. Parents want a quote-unquote real wedding, expensive, emotionally fraught, and capable of causing and fueling familial fractures for years to come. Your mother's Facebook friends need something to gossip about besides her grandbaby's quote-unquote premature delivery, only 7 months after the parents were wed, wink wink. Your soon-to-be wife's grandma has been talking about your wedding since you met, at which point she pronounced your last name wrong and asked if your people eat a lot of goat. It would seem she thinks people from Secaucus have a penchant for caprine cuisine. And then there's Instagram, TikTok, and that one girl from high school who annoyingly takes any chance she can to not so subtly crowbar her engagement ring into every post. We get it. You're an idiot. Social media has turned weddings into competitive art projects. Think Theseus and the Minotaur, but with floral installations and fewer merciful deaths. And let's talk about one of my favorites, the haul culture. Weddings are just haul videos with more tool and entitlement. It's performative consumption on the grandest scale. You want to show you're in love, but at best, what you're really doing is auditioning for the role of a person least likely to be found on Dateline. It's also about not being judged by family, by friends, or more importantly, by strangers who will swipe past your photos forgetting everything about you within mere seconds. Every detail is a status signal and not a very well-disguised cry for validation. And more than that, it's a defense mechanism against the horrifying realization of spending the rest of your life being awoken by another person's morning breath in your face. Or, statistically speaking, 8.2 years until the inevitable divorce. In the end, weddings are less about love and more about proving, if only to yourself, that you did it right. even if right means a mountain of debt, an ulcer the size of a ring box, and a slideshow that will one day make your children question not only your taste and sanity, but how that ethylene glycol really got into your Mountain Dew. All right, but let's crawl out of this tacky pit of despair and squint at the flickering candle of optimism. Are weddings always a scam? Is there anything left to salvage from this avalanche of debt, disappointment, and recycled centerpieces? Some people genuinely love their wedding day. Sometimes the love even lasts longer than the seating chart drama. There are those rare backyard weddings where you get a homemade lemon cake, a Polaroid for the fridge, and a ceremony so short you barely have time to regret being sober. Courthouse weddings exist. So do elopements, potluck picnics, and Vegas chapels staffed by an Elvis impersonator who looks less like the king and more like he was exhumed from Graceland and given an original recipe for Loco. You know, the good ones, before them Democrats at the FDA decided that high levels of caffeine and alcohol in one drink could be dangerous. But back to my point. You don't need a $2,000 dress to have a $2,000 mistake. Just a willingness to disappoint your mother, which has never been an issue for me, and a solid grasp of divorce law. But I'm not going to pretend that there's only one right way to do it. Weddings will always be weird, but they can also be communal and deeply meaningful, especially when they're stripped of debt, pressure, and the expectation that your love needs to be branded with a hashtag and embossed napkins. Sometimes the best party is the one where you forget to take pictures, you eat too much cake, and nobody gives a damn about the flower arrangements. And I'm not trying to judge those who spend a fortune on weddings, although they are fools, but I will point out that statistics show a positive correlation between the amount spent on a wedding and the chances of divorce. As one goes up, so goes the other, like my consumption of organ meats and my cholesterol. But the trick is to remember who the party is actually for. You and the person who just agreed to share their gastrointestinal woes and resulting Dutch ovens for eternity. So, there you have it. Weddings, a ritual where hope, debt, and bodily discomfort come together in a conga line of questionable decisions. You can spend a fortune, elope at midnight, or just be cool and live in sin. Just remember, love doesn't care about centerpieces, cake pops, or the legion forms of cruelty required for a lavish wedding. If you take one thing away, let it be this. The best weddings, like a creditor's meeting for your bankruptcy, are brief, relieving, and free of people showing up with their hands out. This is Donovan signing off. May your debts be discharged, your marriages be brief, and may you always have enough fondant on hand to patch the cracks in your heart. Until next time, take care of yourselves and others. I hope you'll join me on the next one.
Inversiones profundas en la parte baja.